Hey everybody, Bird here, bringing you a video that's a little different from what people are used to on my channel. Well, for one, it's an actual video and not just something that I pulled from my stream. Also, there's scripting, because you kids are into that thing, right? Like most people who enjoy mythology, action, and an all around awesome time, I freaking loved the new God of War game. I've mentioned before that it was one of those games that I didn't know I wanted until I had it. And I was pretty much hooked from the start. I enjoyed the new combat, the new characters introduced, and most of all, I liked the decision to transition Kratos into a whole new world of mythology. In this case, Norse mythology. And one of the biggest differences between the new God of War and the original games is that where many people do have enough knowledge of Greek mythology to kind of understand all the gods and the players that we're meeting and, killing, Norse mythology is a little less well known to the common person, meaning that most of us, myself included, needed to have the gods and the myths explained to us as we went along. Personally, I think the devs handled this pretty well by using Atreus as a vehicle for getting the stories across to us, because that way we had a better understanding of this new world that we were in, so we could better see the impact that we had on it. But one thing that we need to remember is that God of War loves to give us any excuse to kill some immortal beings. So it's never been above tweaking, rewriting, and sometimes straight up omitting certain parts of mythology so that they could suit their needs and progress Kratos' story and arc as a character. We know that they made changes to Greek mythology, but how much did they change up Norse mythology in this new game? Today I'm going to do a little comparing and contrasting of the known lore of the mythology and the in-game canon. Specifically, I'm going to be looking at the maniacal Acer who feels no pain, Baldur. Probably goes without saying, but be prepared for some pretty big spoilers for the new God of War game. Also, something that I want to get out of the way early on. This isn't meant to be an in-depth study of the myths and the legends surrounding these characters. It's a little more of a basic rundown of who we've been interacting with. So think of it as more Norse Mythology 101. Just enough info to get you up to speed, but hopefully not enough to overwhelm you. Part 1. The Lore. In Norse mythology, Baldur is the god of light, purity, joy, and the summer sun. He was regarded by the Germanic pagans as being the divine force behind the beauty of life itself. So when the sun shines brightly, that's Baldur. When the flowers bloom, that's Baldur. When the birds sing their "Hey, you want some fuck" songs? Yep, that's Baldur. Because of how highly regarded Baldur was as a sign of the beauty and exuberance of life, his death was considered the herald of the decline and death of the world and the coming of Ragnarok. In the heavens, Baldur resided in the hall known as Breiðablik, which translates to broad splendor. It was considered to be the fairest of dwellings, where nothing evil or unclean could exist. He also had a pretty extensive family. He was the son of Odin and Frigg, the two highest ranking of the Aesir gods, and he had a wife named Nanna and a son Forseti, who would go on to be the god of justice. He also had numerous siblings, including his half-brother Thor and his twin brother Hurd, the blind giant. And that about covers his baseball card stats. Now let's talk about his personality as a god. We have two different main sources to pull from when it comes to Norse mythology, especially where it concerns Baldur. The first is the Gylfaginning, which was written by Snorri Sturluson as part of his epic The Prose Edda, and it primarily deals with the creation and the destruction of the world of the Norse gods, as well as other aspects of Norse mythology. Sturluson depicts Baldur as being an honorable and courageous being, with his name even coming from the Old Norse word Baldur, which means bold. He was also cheerful, gracious, and the most beloved of all the Norse gods. Baldur is often depicted as being so kind and loving that his body literally shone with the light of his purity. Our second primary source for all things Old Norse is the Gesta Danorum, also known as the Deeds of the Danes. This is an account of Danish history that was written by the 13th century author Saxo Grammaticus. In it, Baldur is shown to have a much more warlike disposition and to be very eager to engage in battle. He's also shown to be arrogant and malevolent, with no thought to the mortals that may be harmed by his actions. Quite a different take from Snorri's tales of a benevolent god with nothing but love in his heart. Now, before we go any farther, I want to make everyone aware of something pretty important in regards to these two sources. The Gesta Danorum was written to be very critical of Germanic paganism, so it's important to note that it likely didn't accurately reflect the beliefs of ancient Nordic peoples. The traits of courage and strength in battle are known to have been valued amongst pre Christian Nords, but the universal love for Baldur and the recognition of him as being a kind and generous Aesir is a pretty critical part of the story of his death, since his death is considered to be the herald of the destruction of all things living and beautiful. Okay, with that little disclaimer out of the way, let's get into the story of Baldur's death. Part 1.2 The Death of Baldur. Once upon a time, Baldur started to have dreams that he would die soon, and since his dreams were usually prophetic, he got a little bit bummed out and went to his mother Frigg for help. Determined to save her son, Frigg traveled the world, making every object on Earth vow to never harm Baldur. The only thing that she didn't get an oath from was the mistletoe. Now, the common explanation for this is that Frigg decided the mistletoe was too small and non threatening to even bother getting an oath from. But there have also been some interpretations saying that this oversight is a reflection of the idea that young people can't swear legal oaths, so they have the potential to be a threat later on in life. So, the lesson of the day is when you demand a non aggression oath from your neighbors, you better make sure you get the oath from their kids too. Look, Tina, I don't care if your 3-month-old can't talk. I'm not leaving this house until he swears that oath. After completing the most tedious messenger quest of all time, Frigg returned to Baldur and assured him that nothing on Earth would ever harm him. And showing that impressive survival instinct that we've all come to expect from immortal beings, Baldur promptly started bragging about his invulnerability to the other gods. To test his new everything-proof shield, the gods amused themselves by throwing knives, spears, and pretty much anything they can get their hands on at Baldur and watching the object sail harmlessly past him. Loki, the Norse god of mischief, decided to live up to his name, and he tricked Frigg into revealing the one item that she had never asked for an oath: the mistletoe. Learning Baldur's only weakness, he made a spear of mistletoe and gave it to Baldur's blind giant brother to throw at him, and it killed the not quite invulnerable god instantly. Baldur's wife Nanna either died of grief or threw herself upon his funeral pyre because she couldn't stand the thought of being away from her husband. And to think, Chris Brown actually thinks these hoes ain't loyal. Well, maybe if you stop smacking your hose around, you find yourself a loyal one, Chris. The gods pleaded with Hel, the queen of the underworld, to release Baldur from her kingdom and to bring him back to life. And, assumedly wanting them to get the hell out of her office so she could focus on her damn job, Hel finally agreed to release him, but only if all the objects on Earth, alive and dead, wept for him. Ultimately, the only being who didn't weep for Baldur was the giantess Thok, who is commonly assumed to have been Loki in disguise. So, because not everyone wept for him, Baldur remained dead until Ragnarok, where it's said that he will return to the land of the living after the destruction of the cosmos, and he will gladden the hearts of the beings who will fill the new world. I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure why Loki was so determined to keep Baldur dead. Maybe he gave a bad review to a Tom Hiddleston movie. Part 2. The Canon. In God of War, Baldur is still referred to as the god of light. His parents are Odin and the Vanir goddess Freya, as opposed to the Aesir goddess Frigg, and his only named siblings are Thor and Tyr. There is no mention of a wife or son, and as we'll soon learn, there might actually be a reason behind this. In the game, he's ruthless, cruel, antagonistic, sadistic, and emotionally unstable due to his invulnerability. There's also a little bit of a hint that he might have been kinder in his earlier years. I'll go into that a little bit more later, but first, let's talk about his death. Part 2.2 In-Game Death. Before the events of God of War, Freya sees in the runes that Baldur will die a needless death. Afraid of losing her son, she casts a spell on him, which renders him completely invulnerable to death and pain. She does this without Baldur's knowledge or consent, and to his horror, he discovers that while he can't be killed or feel pain, he also can't feel any sensation from his 5 senses. He can't taste food, he can't feel the sun on his face, he can't even enjoy sex because of the spell. And that might explain why he doesn't have a wife or a son in this interpretation. Baldur is consumed with hatred for his mother because of what she's done, and he never forgave her for casting the spell. The lack of physical sensation leads to Baldur's emotional instability, and Mimir does imply that it might have made him more cruel and sadistic than he originally was. Okay, now let's get into the actual events of the game. Baldur is sent by Odin to track the Jotun Guardian, later revealed to be Kratos' dead wife Faye. This causes him to cross paths with Kratos and Atreus, and thus begins the first of many violent interactions between the two gods. At one point in their journey, Atreus is given mistletoe arrows by the dwarven blacksmith Sindri. Later, Kratos notices that Atreus' quiver strap is broken, and he uses the heads of one of the mistletoe arrows to fix it. This is some pretty epic foreshadowing to anyone who's ever heard anything about the story of Baldur. During Kratos' final fight with Baldur, who at this point is mad with rage and very eager to murder Freya if Kratos doesn't stop him, Atreus is punched in the chest. The head of the mistletoe arrow pierces Baldur's hand, but instead of killing him instantly, it simply breaks Freya's spell, and it renders Baldur vulnerable to pain and death for the first time in who knows how long. Ecstatic at finally being able to feel again, Baldur decides to just keep on with his original plan of committing matricide. Which, I mean, yeah, sure. You've finally been freed of a curse that's been figuratively and literally blue-balling you for this long. I mean, who wouldn't want to kill their mother after that? You know, hire a hooker, throw a big feast, have the godliest orgy of all time? Screw that. Killing mommy is where it's at. Kratos, in a rare moment of not deciding to solve all of his problems with murder, pleads with Baldur to spare Freya. He is desperately trying to save him from continuing the cycle of children murdering their parents. Kratos knows better than anyone that killing a parent is going to haunt Baldur for the rest of his days, regardless of his justifications, and he wants to spare him the guilt that comes with such an act. Baldur considers Kratos' words for all of 3 seconds before deciding, nah fam, and starting to strangle Freya to death. Unwilling to allow another child to murder his parent, Kratos reluctantly kills Baldur by snapping his neck. That's alright, dude. Sometimes the only way to get through to these kids is just give them a good old-fashioned neck snap. Baldur's final words are about his joy at finally being able to feel the snow again. And Freya is enraged and vows revenge on Kratos for killing the son that she so desperately tried to save. Kratos and Atreus finish their business in Jotunheim, and they return to Midgard to find it covered in a seemingly endless snow. Mimir and Brock predict that the snow is the sign of the 3-year winter that signals the beginning of Ragnarok, the end of all things. So, just like in the myth, Baldur's death still kicks off the apocalypse. Good job, Kratos. Part 3. Conclusion. Baldur's powers, weaknesses, and death are kept fairly consistent with the original mythology. He even dies because of Loki, which is revealed to be the name that Faye originally wanted to give Atreus. The major difference about his death has to do with his mom's motivations and actions. In the myth, Frigg gathers oaths to make Baldur invulnerable because he is afraid to die, and ultimately he's very happy with her actions. But in the game, Freya is kind of the definition of a helicopter parent, and she performs an invulnerability spell without his knowledge. While the basic circumstances of Baldur's death are similar, his in-game personality seems to be pulled more from the Gesta Danorum than from the Gylfaginning. However, there are some hints that Baldur's personality might have originally been closer to the benevolent Aesir that's portrayed in the Gylfaginning. He seems to possess some remnants of his sense of honor and mercy. He's more engaged in his fights with Kratos whenever the Spartan unleashes his godly powers, and he offers to try and free Mimir in exchange for information about Kratos and Atreus. While in Hell, we also see that while he was very furious at Freya's actions, he was originally unable to kill her when he first learned about her spell. This is an act of mercy that he's shown to bitterly regret, and this might hint at a kinder and gentler Baldur than the one that Kratos and Atreus met. So, it seems to me that the developers opted to show a darker side to Baldur's invulnerability, and to use that as an explanation for why God of War Baldur is markedly different from his mythological counterpart. I think that this might have been done more in the name of practicality than artistic license. Because, as we saw in the original trilogy, God of War really loves its apocalyptic events. And if they're going to move Kratos into Norse mythology, then the apocalyptic event would have to be Ragnarok. Ragnarok can only be initiated by the death of Baldur. As much of an asshole as Kratos can be sometimes, we still sympathized with him in the original games because the Greek gods were pretty much even bigger assholes. We were totally cool with him murdering his father because, let's face it, Zeus is pretty much the king cunt of Mount Cunt Olympus in the God of War trilogy. I mean, the devs couldn't exactly have Kratos murder an Aesir who's widely regarded as the most beloved little cinnamon bun who ever existed. So exploring the downsides to invulnerability, which is a power that's often widely considered the best power ever, seems like a pretty effective way to create a cruel, murderous, and ultimately tragic antagonist. Thanks thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed.
No.